We're good?
Yes.
Hi everybody.
Hi there.
So welcome to Roundabout Books Thursday Night Author Series. I'm Julie, the events manager for the store, and I want to thank everyone for braving the tumultuous weather we've been going through to be with us tonight. Last week it was so warm, and then it snows, and then it melts. Good times. So just a quick reminder about some upcoming events that we have. So on April 30th, we are celebrating Independent Bookstore Day with a grand reopening for our expanded space. We will have tote bags, goodies, and 6 Oregon authors on hand from 12 to 2 to promote their books. They're going to be sitting at tables around the area, so you can just go up and talk to them about their book, see if you want to buy it, get it signed. Really easy. So there's some really fun stuff happening in May. May 4th, Michelle Richardson will join us via Zoom to discuss her new book, The Bookwoman's Daughter, which is the follow-up to The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek. And the following day on May 5th, we have Summer Michaud-Skog in the store to talk about her book, Fat Girls Hiking. And we just got confirmation a couple days ago that on May 10th, international author Dervla McTiernan will be joining us via Zoom. She's in Australia, but we're going to live stream it here in the store. So if you're a fan of those mystery thriller things, it's going to be really exciting to talk with her. We're recording tonight's event for our YouTube channel, and you can find recordings going back to our events from May 2020. So tonight, I'm so happy to welcome Carolyn Wood, who drove down from Portland just this morning to talk about her new book, Class Notes. Kate Gray, author of For Every Girl and Carry the Sky, says, in Class Notes, the Olympian Carolyn Wood blends literary and musical references, the dreams and sensibility of a young adult, and insights into a family the media made Americans believe we knew. In her deft prose, she offers the complicated nature of parenting, faith, politics, and most importantly, grief. Class Notes is an intimate, complicated, and kind portrayal of American royalty. Carolyn is also the author of Tough Girl, Lessons in Courage and Heart from Olympic Gold to the Camino de Santiago, published in 2018. So please welcome Carolyn Wood.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. It was quite a journey over because, of course, the media makes you think that the world is coming to an end. And in fact, there was no snow on the road all the way over, so that was good. And I'm glad I'm here and such a tough girl. You haven't read that book. I want to start just by talking about sort of the origins of this book. I had 2 stories to tell. One was that Olympic story, and the other was this year that I spent in a pretty incredible place. I have a couple more stories too, but those were the ones that sort of spoke to me. But this particular one started earlier in that I wanted to talk about what it was like my first year of teaching and how difficult it was. Not sort of the years after it when I had really super students, but just the torture of that first professional job. And then the second was the year back east. When I was a junior, almost every junior English student in Oregon had to write a term paper. And my term paper was on Stephen Crane because he'd only written 1 novel and a novella and a lot of short stories. And it was a good choice because I also liked his impressionism, but he wrote one story that was called An Experiment in Misery, and that story has stayed with me. It was a story about him, basically, as the narrator, who spends some time on the Bowery in New York with the homeless, the drunks, the out of work. And that notion that one could leave one's life and try an experiment resonated with me. And so did Thoreau's 2 years at Walden, where he lived alone, didn't work, was able to write and think. That also seemed kind of a cool idea. And all the years that I taught American Lit, I had my students design an experiment that they would do over spring vacation, or they could extend it longer. Something out of the ordinary for them to take notes on it and then to write it up as how did it impact them. The other influencer was a professor named Stevenson, Dr. Stevenson, who was my US history teacher at Oregon. And he had a seminar in the spring where he suggested that we keep a wild thoughts notebook. He said, you're of the age where ideas and experiences are going to be novel, and you want to keep a record of them. So I got myself some yellow tablets, which I still buy, and I kept off and on wild thoughts, almost up to the time that I had a child. Then there was kind of a long empty space. I had a lot of wild thoughts, but they just didn't go down on yellow sheets. But it was when I retired and really began traveling that I started again, at least when I was on the road, especially if I was alone, writing pretty good notes about what had happened on a particular day. So that's a call out to keeping some sort of record of one's life. But way back there in the 1960s, the decade that this book is set in, some of us here will remember it quite well. I went to grade school and high school and college with some people who are here. We were sophomores in high school when the first president born in the 20th century was elected. He was assassinated our freshman year in college. It was a time when we had a dress code and closing hours and sleeping porches, which I think now probably occurred because of the 1918 flu epidemic, that people were encouraged to sleep in open air when they congregated. So maybe they'll come back. The book focuses on 1967 to 1970. And so I started teaching in 67, 68, 68, 69, I was at the Kennedys. And then I came back to teach at Beaverton. In that time period, June of 1967, the 6-Day War broke out between, was called the Arab-Israeli War. That summer was the summer of riots all across the United States, including in Portland. There was the ongoing Vietnam War. In fact, that fall, a classmate of ours was killed in Vietnam in '67. There was the assassinations first of Martin Luther King Jr., and then a month later, Bobby Kennedy, the chaotic Democratic Convention in Chicago, the election of Richard Nixon, the 1968 Mexico City Olympics, where the Black Power symbol was given, and then Muhammad Ali refused to be drafted. He was Cassius Clay when we rode home on the plane together from Rome. By that fall, Yellow Submarine had come out, and the White Album. And then that summer, the summer of '69, a man landed on the moon. And just weeks later, Chappaquiddick occurred. And the following spring was the shootings at Kent State, and then the riots at Portland State, where I happened to be in class. All of that is in the background. But the foreground, of course, for a 22-year-old and a 23-year-old is me. Me. What was happening in the classroom? What was happening at the Kennedys? 1967 was a world without computers, without cell phones, without digital cameras. Long-distance phone calls cost $5 a minute, way too expensive. Film came in rolls of 12, 24, or 36. And you waited a week to see if they turned down. Oh no, they were all overexposed. It was a time when people wrote letters to each other, and they kept letters. But it was also, especially in '68, '69, and '70, a time when we discovered that you could send 3-inch reel-to-reel tapes back and forth. think our friend Gretchen Rittenauer was who began sending tapes to her husband in Vietnam, and they would come back. So my parents got a neighbor to loan them a tape recorder, and I started sending tapes of my first experiences. So now, yeah, okay, we're almost ready for audiovisual aids, but I just wanted to also say I got to see it Portland State in audiovisual aids. Julie has helped me set things up, but we'll see how it works. But first, let's see. Okay, from the prologue. Years after I retired from teaching, while emptying the attic for new insulation, I pulled down the swimming scrapbooks my mother had so carefully kept throughout my racing days, and I set to work telling that story. It became the memoir, Tough Girl, an account of training and competing in the 1960 Rome Olympics and reflections while walking the Camino 50 years later. I found another container up there in the attic, a long red and white cardboard box that had once held Christmas wrapping. In it, my mother had stored all the letters I'd written home from the year I spent as governess for the Kennedy family. She typed them out in duplicate so she could share them with neighbors and friends. The Beaverton High newspaper, yellow and brittle, carried a letter I'd sent to the student body describing my duties and encouraging them to someday take a wild step into the unknown, as I did the day I began campaigning for Robert Kennedy. You never know where that first step will lead you. I'm sure you'll find your own adventure. Believe me, it's worth the effort. Pictures of the kids taken those first weeks on Cape Cod in August 1968 and later throughout the year at Hickory Hill filled 2 photo albums. My mom had stored in a plastic bag the little 3-inch reel-to-reel audio tapes that we'd sent back and forth because long distance seemed too expensive. I counted 25. Will they still play, I wondered? There were a ski race bid from Sun Valley and some cards and drawings from the kids, mass cards, the program from Rory's baptism in January 1969. The trove had been roasting and freezing up in the attic for over 40 years. Who even has a tape player anymore? That's right. When you're over 75, you've got a lot of stories to tell and not that much time left to tell them. You've made choices and followed paths that maybe you'd like to explore again, or to explain to yourself perhaps, or to your children, your grandchildren, your curious students who asked so long ago. Get busy, I advise. No time to waste. After I hauled that long red and white box down the attic ladder, I worked my way through the letters and journals, postcards and articles from the Kennedy time, talked with former colleagues, reconnected with friends. Memories and stories returned from that extraordinary and ordinary year. When the audio tapes came back from the lab, digitized, I sat at my desk for several minutes before clicking play, reluctant to hear what might or might not be on those recordings. Through a back window, my computer opened before me. I looked out onto the same green plot where my parents had built their home some 80 years before, and watched the limbs on grand fir lift and drop, ferns tremble under spring rain. And then I listened. The high young voice that came forth, so confident and funny, made me doubt that it was really me. But when my parents spoke, my father's voice, deliberate and formal, his expression so familiar, and my mother interrupting him with laughter and meandering stories, time overlapped for a moment. With me at my desk, and back in 1968 simultaneously, I was eavesdropping on ghosts. So, see what I mean? Okay, so. I'm alive. this is a book trailer that my student, Boaz Frankel, who has a book with his wife, Brooke Barker, called Let's Be Weird Together, made for it. He took my tapes and made a slideshow, or made this video. Oh, is this on? Okay, so a little bit.
There's the haunted house around this area. It's about 10:30 and I'm just about ready for bed as soon as I finish this little gem to you all. Not much happened today. I believe the secretary is leaving for a week and I don't know what's going to happen because she's been giving me warnings about how difficult the job's going to be and everything, and who's hair to stay out of and that sort of stuff. We had a slight blow up today, which was pretty interesting. I'm supposed to completely ignore those because if I take them to heart, I'll end up with a nervous breakdown like the last governess. Anyway, she said that Thanksgiving is just a rat race and that Christmas is unbelievable because we decorate the house 3 times. Oh, Jackie came home today, but I haven't seen her yet. And Mother, I would suggest that you be very careful in who you talk to and what you tell them. Well, keep track of the convention. Could be interesting if Teddy gets the nomination, couldn't it? So I guess I'll just tick off here. I said the paper's running down and I don't know what to say. I'll tell the Kit Kats hello, and Richard, and Barbara and Betty, and Mrs. Lee and Andrea and Bee and Georgie. And Simmons.
Okay, so we'll see some of those pictures again. I don't care about this hot spot either, and I don't know how to make this bottom thing go away, but see, lucky. You just have to see my private. Okay, let's see. So, when I hear the voice on the tape recording that you hear, you get the idea of what it felt like to be 22 years old and kind of gossipy, I guess I would say. But then, you know, tapes are monologues. They're not dialogues. Oh, I did want to have this open. So I'm just going to give you a couple more slides. This was taken in Portland, the primary in Portland. This is Edith Green with Robert Kennedy. She was the campaign manager. It was the first primary election that a Kennedy had ever lost. And when I offered Mrs. Kennedy a book by that Oregon photographer for Christmas, she said I could keep it. She didn't want anything from Oregon. This was the cover of Life. That's Bobby and Freckles on Oregon Beach. It was published a week after he was dead. So one of the things I was unprepared for, besides wealth and power, was a world of grief. My grandmother had died, but that's really the only experience that I had had. And here was the family. And this was my only introduction to who the kids were, and I used it to memorize their names so I would know who was who when I arrived. Spent the summer prepping, and here is the John F. Kennedy house in the compound, and for the first 2 weeks I got to sleep upstairs in John F. Kennedy's bedroom.
Oh my gosh.
That's what I said. And this was the view from my window, which was out to the Robert Kennedy house, that sort of Dutch one, and to the left is the ambassador's house, the first one that was built in the compound. Okay. So this is the excited little girl. We'll call her. She thought she was pretty old, 22.
May I interrupt?
Yeah.
What year again was this?
1968.
1968. Wow. So this is a year after.
This is the year he ran. Bobby Kennedy was running for president. But what is
Well, John F. had been assassinated
63.
2 years before. Or
63.
Okay, 63.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. No. This is why when you write a memoir, you have this giant piece of butcher paper of a timeline. Okay. So hold this thought. Mornings on the Oregon coast emerged from forest shadows and gray mist. It almost felt like home when light whispered me awake the next morning. This is after I think I got to bed about 1 o'clock in the morning. I'd flown into Boston. My eyes blinked to see green light, a salt-scented breeze ruffling the sheer white curtains. The oil painting caught my eye. Had the driver last night really told me that this was the president's room, that he painted that picture? You'll be staying here at Mrs. John's house until she gets back from Europe, Bob had said. Just thinking that made my heart speed and my stomach clench. Don't get excited, Carolyn. Get up and get moving. As soon as I looked out the window and saw the sunlight glaring off the sound, where already a few sailboats skimmed across the blue, I knew I was in a foreign land. From somewhere below, out of sight, children's voices piped high and indistinct. It was time to get out and meet the Kennedys. I took a deep breath and turned away from the window. Downstairs, I retraced the path Bob and I had taken at midnight, following a tall, unruly boxwood hedge along the lawn, aiming for the gap I knew opened into the Robert Kennedy driveway. About halfway across the yard, jitters struck, like they had my first day of teaching. Keep walking, I ordered myself. Overhead, a few gulls hung on the updrafts, white against the clear blue sky. Is anyone watching me from the house? Ahead, the Robert Kennedy house stood still and quiet, the side door entrance closed. Should I knock, I wondered. Through its window, I could see Joe, who I'd met the night before, plates in hand in a far-off room. The entry room, which I'd learned was also the secretary's office, there were 2 working there that summer, was empty. I knocked and turned the knob at the same time, and Joe looked up, smiled, put his hand out to wait. He disappeared, and then quickly returned empty-handed. Good morning. Ready to get with it, kid? He greeted me. He asked in a greeting I'd come to know was all Mrs. Kennedy. I followed him past the desks and worn-out sofa, past a carpeted staircase, and into the far room. At one end of the dining table, Ethel Skakel Kennedy sat talking on the phone. She looked smaller than I expected, but solid. Her thick, sun-bleached hair tangled and wild, as if she'd come in from a windstorm, and that leathery brown skin of women who spent too much time outdoors playing tennis, sailing, skiing, lying out in the sun. Her eyes roved the room while she talked, catching everything momentarily in her foxy gaze. She'd be on the phone or talking with friends almost every time I saw her the first weeks. Even when she stopped talking, you could hear her. Joe the butler pointed me to a seat at the other end of the table, not at the end, but next to it. Would you care for eggs or cereal this morning for breakfast? Joe asked in his proper English accent. I was afraid I might break out laughing. Wheaties, I said. Mrs. Kennedy glanced up, made eye contact, and talked on. If anyone else was at the table that morning, I'd forgotten them. All my senses focused on her. Perched on the edge of my chair, I slipped at my knees, waiting for the opportunity to introduce myself and present my father's gift. When she finally ended her call, I stood, identified myself, and handed her the little jar of caviar. Terrific kid. We'll serve it tomorrow night when the Whitakers and Glens are here. Did she know about the fresh Chinook delivered to Joe the night before? Before I could ask, another call came in, and her focus shifted. It pushed on into my first day with no real instructions. What next, I wondered. In the bright entry, a young woman now sat at a desk by the front door. Lee Geisen, Mrs. Kennedy's secretary, who would become my touchstone as the weeks unfolded. This morning, she looked up from the cluttered desk, a cigarette smoldering in an ashtray, and commented, "You must be Carolyn. Welcome to the monkey house." And boy, was she right. Okay, so, now get a slideshow. Oops. Oh, Julie. There we go. Okay. So, this is Matthew Maxwell Taylor Kennedy and Christopher George Kennedy, who were 3 and 5. They were not really my charges, but they were my charges because when you come into a family of 10, the little kids accept you quickest. One of my jobs was to take the girls to the farm, and this is Courtney riding, and the guy in the red shorts is pretty big and riding the house. You might recognize some of these people from left to right: Maria Shriver, Courtney, Caroline, and Sydney Lawford. Peter Lawford's Eunice as well. And 2 weeks after I arrived, Jackie came back from Greece. She also married Aristotle Onassis that year. Wow. So here's Caroline and John, Freckles running off in the background. Ethel, Teddy, somebody I don't know, and the guy in all white is Bill Berry, who was one of Bobby Kennedy's bodyguards. He, a former FBI agent. And that beautiful Bonneville I got to drive on my days off even. Red upholstery, top down. Nothing gets better than that when you're 22. That's Courtney on the Atlas doing a jump. For the 3rd annual Kennedy, things were low key there. No PowerPoint making fancy, and sort of idyllic day riding bareback out in the ponds. Christopher George at the swim club, or the swim docking place. Again, Maria Shriver, Courtney, Caroline. Christopher was my good buddy after our first encounter, which if you've read the book, you know that it involved a shaken Coca-Cola. But fortunately I'd been a lifeguard and knew how to handle those sorts of things. And just the kids. Rosie Greer and Rayford Johnson came one weekend and played a little football with everybody. This is Joe the butler, who was just a wonderful guy, still is a wonderful guy. He's now an architect in Washington, D.C. And in the background is Michael Kennedy. Courtney and Michael were two of my real charges. Here's Courtney's birthday party scavenger hunt. And one of my letters home to, there's the pile of letters, there's the 3-inch tapes. And here's one. Craig was here earlier. He is a Bendite. His first wife, Linda, taught with me at Beaverton. And this is Douglas Harriman Kennedy. And and the blue meanies from Yellow Submarine. So now we've moved to Hickory Hill. So I was up at the Cape for about 4 weeks, maybe 5, and then the rest of the year was in Virginia, in McLean, Virginia, Hickory Hill. Michael looking like a young Romanoff. David Kennedy, terrific football player, a bit of a handful, but I was a good enough athlete to match him. And here's Halloween. Carrie Kennedy, who is now head of the foundation, going as someone, we don't know who. So this is inside the Kennedy's house. Actually, John Kennedy owned this house with Jackie and wrote Profiles in Courage in it. And then when the Robert Kennedy family kept having kids, he bought it from John. This is Lee Geisen, who was my best buddy. She quit after Halloween, but we stayed in touch. And the busy calendar with doctor's appointments and school visits and you name it, it was on the calendar. And here's, these guys were my favorite, Courtney and Michael. And this was my 23rd birthday. Ruby, the cook, had made a sheet cake with an Olympic swimming pool on it. Bobby Jr. was home. You can see that he was already getting in trouble. He's hypnotized by lighting matches. You just don't get close to the curtains, please, Bobby. Ina had been with the family since Kathleen was born, and they supported her until she died at 105.
Wow.
And there's Hickory Hill in a snowstorm, not unlike the one we had on Monday.
Yeah.
Carrie and Michael were the godparents for Rory, who was born December 12th. So Mrs. Kennedy was pregnant when baby was born. And Nunu was the baby nurse. So they had there was a nurse for Mrs. Kennedy, Lulu Hennessy, who had been with the Kennedys since 1936 with illnesses and pregnancies. Then came Nunu, who took care of the baby for 6 weeks or 7 weeks. Then there was Ina, who took care of them from thereafter. And then there was the governess. That was a rotating cast. And here's Max's birthday, his 4th birthday. Caroline came down for it. David is in the blue. Joe got his naturalization while I was there. Christopher and Doug. Max and Courtney. David reading the paper. And then the model Apollo. Len Billings, this guy, was John F. Kennedy's best friend in prep school and college, and sort of would come down and touch bases with the kids now and then. Dave Hackett was the other person who lived in Virginia, who was Bobby Kennedy's best friend from prep school and college, and frequently came. So here's getting ready for the big launch. So this would have been maybe May of 1969. So it's just, 3 or 4 months before the real Apollo. Dun, 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 dun. This is my mother and her best friend, Georgie, who came to visit while Mrs. Kennedy was off on Jackie and Ari Onassis's yacht. Thank God. I don't think I could have managed. Yeah. And some of you might remember Art Buchwald. He was a columnist for Washington Post. So he was always the master of ceremonies for a big pet show that was a fundraiser for. But here is Joe the butler's lure for me to quit the job early and go to Europe. And Lee Geisen, Joe the butler, and I did indeed go to Europe. travel around, sleep in the tent. I can't believe it, we packed all this stuff. And I actually got to go back to the pool in Rome, where I swam in the Olympics. And then I came back to Beaverton to those rainy, gloomy days, Hoyt Arboretum, Wildwood Trail, with my wonderful, fabulous students. So, yeah, so let's see, one last. What had I been thinking when I wrote to Senator Kennedy in the spring of 1968 offering to teach his kids to swim? That I might have a chance to step into history, to meet important people? Back in the 1960s, the president and later the senator and all their relatives and children had become the Kennedys. They represented what we might aspire to, their lofty ideals, their oversized actions, what we might try to emulate. But in the 9 months that I lived with them, I discovered instead their humanity, with all its flaws and beauty. I had thought they possessed something I didn't have, something I wanted to know, only to discover that they weren't in on some secret, didn't possess superior knowledge. The incidents that made up their daily lives weren't any more or less important than what was going on in every living person's life. Not more important than my father's new store or a teacher's new classes. Not more important than students protesting the Vietnam War or bus drivers getting kids to school on time. Not more important than my mother's friends sitting with her after my father died. We all experience worry and jealousy, hope, fear, delight, anger, grief, and love. History is happening all around us every day, wherever we are. In his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, Faulkner said that the poet's, the writer's duty is to help humanity endure by writing about love and honor, compassion and sacrifice. It is also the teacher's privilege and duty to lift hearts, to awaken curiosity. It's what Robert Kennedy meant when he urged us to stand up for ideals, to act to improve the lives of others, to send out ripples of hope. What I wrote to Anne about teaching English, I believed throughout my career. Literature provides a window through which we learn compassion and understanding for ourselves and for others. Writing enables us to share our questions and our discoveries. My role was to motivate students to read, think, write, and act, to create ripples day after day, year after year. So, I would encourage all of you to think about your own memories, your own witnesses of history. I think memoir has come to mean tell your most horrible story, the trauma that that's going to outdo the last book, it seems like. But memoir can also be like Truman Capote's The Christmas Memory. It's just, I don't know, 10 pages long, and yet he captures so beautifully a person who was important to him and what Christmases were like during that little wedge of time. He didn't have kids and grandkids, or he just had, the world to read his stuff. But we all have those little memoir stories that I think are worth saving. I think it was Linda Berry, but it could have been Alison Bechtel, who started a COVID diary, and she had ideas for how to start it, and I did some of them with her. And she said, it's going to be important for people to know, your kids, your grandkids, others, what these 2 years have been like. I mean, we're coming out of it now. I've forgotten, if I read what I was writing 2 years ago, it's just astonishing. I mean, I thought 2,000 deaths was just like, oh. And now 1 million, and we don't even blink, or maybe we do. we have war to worry about. My mom was still talking about the 1918. She was 8 years old. Both of her parents got sick. They had a nurse that lived in their house. I heard that story a million times. My son, who's 47, said, "Oh yeah, I heard that story a few times too." So. But when we're both gone, that story's gone unless somebody writes it down. So that's my pitch.
Yeah.
My pitch is that, and my other pitch is support your bookstores because they have kept us.
Yes.
The feeling is mutual. We would not be here without you guys.
Yeah. Okay, so
Well, that was wonderful.
I'm willing to answer any questions or sell any books or whatever.
I have a question. So I didn't understand why you were only there for a year. Was it supposed to be just a one-year contract?
Yes. I mean, I'm sure they wanted me to come back to Sun Valley for Christmas. And I'm sure if I had wanted to stay, I could have stayed till I was 105 probably. But I was pretty through.
So
It was a
you-
lot like the school year. You know how, those of us who are teachers, you know how excited you are? September, October, you get them all under control. Then there's Christmas, and then it's just like, oh my God, how far is March? And then by the time March arrives, the kids are all gone. I mean, they're dating, they're breaking up, they're trying to get a who knows what. That's kind of how it was.
Great, thank you.
So were you doing all the lesson plans for all these kids, or were
No.
they in school and
No.
then you were?
They went to school. The boys went to the Potomac School. The girls went to Sacred Heart. Mrs. Kennedy asked me if it would be beneath me to work with Max. I had no idea what that meant. Like, because I'm a high school teacher, or was she?
And he
being
was how old?
He was 3. Or was she being sarcastic? I didn't know, but I thought, okay, well, yeah, we'll draw pictures. Yeah, the term governess is an odd one because now everybody has a nanny, right? And John F. Kennedy's governess came from Switzerland and spoke French so that the kids would be bilingual. The Robert Kennedy governesses lasted, I think, if they could play football. Different family. But I did do carpool and all that kind of stuff. And some homework, you know. I was the parent who had made them do their homework and then get to bed on time and then wake up in the morning. Yeah.
Carolyn, is my memory fading? Because I seem to remember one of the things you said was how many pairs of shoes you had to polish.
Oh yeah, the boys' shoes. The girls I didn't have to worry about, but, well, the boys, if you have kids, you know, when somebody comes home from school, all they want to do is get outside and play. Well, if you don't snag them, and, well, they wore leather shoes. Kids just wear sneakers now. But yeah, I hid the shoes.
Every night? I thought you
Pretty
I thought
frequently,
you had said
certainly on Sundays. I mean, Saturday night I had the shoes hidden so that Sunday when we went to Mass, the shoes were ready.
Scrubbing the finger.
The fingernails went on and on until forever.
Are you still in contact with any
No.
of Kennedy?
I was in contact for a year or two, and then when David died, Courtney got in touch with me and asked me to write something and to share some photos, and then nothing since then. But I'm still in touch with Joe and Lee.
How much hands-on was Ethel?
Well, it was besides just having a husband murdered in front of her, she began to have early contractions up at the Cape. That football thing, right after that game, she didn't play, but she was watching, and it had been an incredible summer. She started having these early contractions. So she cut back a ton of stuff. Then when we got down to Virginia, I think we were there maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and she was put on complete bed rest. But the kids went in every night and spent time with her. And she would, well, she didn't, I mean, prior to that she wouldn't eat, but she would sit with the little kids when they had their dinner And then when we had our dinner, the older kids, governesses are considered staff. So I sat at the table. Secretaries were help. So they ate in the, I mean, they did more than I did, but whatever. So.
Carolyn, one of the things I just loved about the book was the letter you wrote to Anne, encouraging her to hang in there with teaching. That really resonated.
Good. Yeah, that was a pretty wise letter for someone who had only taught 1 year. But see, the polish comes back when you. That's why teachers always have summers off, so that you're excited again in September.
So, I'm sorry.
Oh.
What did you do in the Olympics? You swim? Like, what was your event?
I swam 100 butterfly, 100 freestyle, and both relays, one in the preliminaries and the other one in the finals.
She's 14 years old.
Gold medal.
Gold medal, yeah.
Wow. You should have that wrapped around your neck right now.
Just imagination.
I was at your book talk for that, and you brought the medal.
Did I?
Yes.
Oh.
That was a couple years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
You didn't go back like in 64?
No, I'll give my pitch. Edith Green was one of the sponsors of Title IX. There was no Title IX until 1972. So colleges didn't have swim teams. And my age, I had just finished my freshman year in high school, and I couldn't imagine not going to college. So
You had to make a choice, basically.
I did. I made it over that I decided that summer of my junior year that I would swim through high school season, which at that time was in the fall. And then I turned pro.
Yes.
$1.25 an hour as a lifeguard. I got my first check. No more amateur athletics, no more Olympics, done. And at Christmas I said, well, what if I change my mind? And Rod Harmon said, well, I think if you sent back the $37, 58 or whatever pittance it was, but by then.
I have to tell one story on you, Carolyn.
All right.
We went to grade school and high school and college together. Jeep, my husband, tells the story of everybody had to take swimming at Beaverton High School, and the pool was right next to the school. What a concept. Wish we had that here. But at any rate, it was boys and girls, and each one had a team. And Jeep said, so the boys get in the water, and it's a relay, and they're going, and Carolyn is, for the girls, she is the last one. And they're going, the guys are doing the best they can, going back and forth. And Carolyn gets in the water, and Jeep describes it as a motorboat. Just took off, and the guys are so left in the dust. And then when she got out, she put her hands, he said he was beside himself. She put her hands up on the, what do you call it? The deck, and hoisted herself up and out. The boys are just, oh my gosh.
Wish I could do that now.
It was, well, it just let them know.
Yeah.
There's you, and then there's Carolyn.
I do remember sitting behind our quarterback, John Erickson, and looking at his arm and thinking, God, his arm is smaller than mine.
That I believe, absolutely.
When you made the choice to do, like you taught a year, you had a steady job,
Yes.
and then you said, oh, I think I'm gonna go do this.
No.
Was there anybody that said, are you crazy?
Yeah, it's kind of. I applied to go for the summer. I thought I can teach swimming lessons. That was my pitch. I got a call, like Memorial Weekend, to come to Disneyland to take the kids. Maybe it was later than that, it was whatever. It was right before the primary, it was right before he was killed. Then I got the call to come down there, and it was finals week coming up. I had piles of papers, so I said, no, I can't do it. Then it was a month later that I got a call from back east saying, it was actually Jim Whittaker's wife, Blanche Whittaker, saying, can you come for the whole year? Mrs. Kennedy wants to fulfill the senator's wishes, and he wanted his kids to work with you. And I had just signed a contract, first year teacher, right? So I go to the principal, and I said, no, I can't, I just signed a contract. And she said, talk to your principal. So I went into Mr. Logan, and he was like, of course, go. What he didn't tell me, or what I didn't know, was first year teachers don't have privileges to come back. You know, I had to resign, but I didn't even know I'd resigned. I thought I was on the leave of absence. That's why later it was so fortuitous when the word came that there was going to be an opening at the high school.
But your parents were like, oh, like.
Oh yeah.
You're just like.
My parents had been letting go of me since I was 13. I mean, that was the first time I flew in an airplane to go to the Pan Am trials. Yeah.
I'm curious, you were politically active, you know, back in the 60s. Has that remained a theme for your life, or how did that?
I would say no. I have been active, but I haven't been noisy about it. I mean, I certainly was involved in gay rights movement, but not to put myself on the front page of the paper. I support candidates that I believe are going to lead us in a good direction. I think I felt my political action was just getting kids motivated about learning and what direction math took them.
Did you see signs of David Kennedy's writing? I mean, he became kind of like a writer or journalist, right?
David?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I know, I mean, he died of a drug overdose.
I know, but I mean before.
Oh, before?
I think wasn't he interested in writing or
Maybe.
something?
He did. I mean, I have samples. I helped them all write. They wrote a book for their father for the 1-year anniversary. And each of my 4 kids had to write, or they were invited to write a piece. And David's was, each child's essay really spoke to what their father meant to them. And David's, was that his father, no matter if he was mad at you or not, or disappointed in you or not, you knew that he loved you. And that seemed pretty incredible. And Michael wrote about his father always made sure that they included everybody in a football game. So the big kids would take care of the little, they didn't play the whole game, but they made space for whoever, and that was important. Carrie just remembered them coming home from a trip and having a big party. She was 8.
How did they respond to Jackie when she became an Onassis?
You know, they were curious. We went up and I took the 2 girls up and we stayed in her apartment or her condo or whatever you call it when you own a whole floor of a building in New York. It's not really a house. And she was on her honeymoon at that time, and in my notes I wrote, I am really curious. The girls are curious what Caroline thinks about the wedding, but there's no notes after that of what anybody said about the wedding. So I think whatever. It was sort of like, oh, whatever. But Jackie was a very kind and quiet person, even though she mooched cigarettes off me.
Well, I think that about wraps us up.
That's a good answer.
I want to thank everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. This is our best attended event since our new expansion. So thank you.
Bravo.
Grab a copy of the book. You can have when we run out, we will happily special order them, and then maybe you and I can figure out like signed book plates or
Okay.
something. You know, we can get those in the mail.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll be over here to check people out, and then Carolyn, we can just actually